So now let's take a look at how pattern recognition involves information processing. So we can see here a very general information processing model, and it involves perception, of course, sensory information coming in, being perceived. That sometimes leads to immediate action, if there's a stimulus response sort of type of immediate reaction, or information can be brought into working memory through attention. It can perhaps be remembered in long-term memory, and so on. So information processing was first studied by having participants look at an array of letters. So for example, K, P, S, M, and so on, and had them look at them for a very brief time, 50 milliseconds, or 1/20th of a second. And they were asked to report all the letters that they could remember. So remember, this is being shown very, very briefly, for a very brief amount of time. Participants were generally limited to reporting an average of 4.5 letters. Why that limitation, though? There's two possibilities. Is it because that was the limit to the number of letters that can be recognized? In other words, is it a limitation in perception? Or was it because people couldn't remember more than an average of 4.5 letters at a time? Was it a problem with memory? So it could either have been a limitation in perception or a limitation in memory. Based on this by itself, we don't know. So Sperling developed what's called the partial report procedure, where they're shown many letters. So here we can see that they're shown 12 letters, again, for a very brief amount of time. So they look at the fixation cross, just to bring their gaze to the middle of the screen. This is flashed on the screen for a very brief period of time, and then they hear a tone, like a beep. And that beep could be either a very low tone, beep, or it could be a middle tone, beep, or a very high tone, beep. And if it was the highest tone, then they were supposed to try and report the letters in the very top row. Notice the beep comes after they see the letters. So if it's a problem in perception, the tone shouldn't help, right? Because the tone is coming afterwards and they're still trying to perceive these 12 letters all at once. If it's a problem with memory, then the tone should work because they're then only asked to remember these 4 letters. And so participants were able to correctly report 3 of the 4 letters in the row, suggesting that they perceived 9 out of the 12 here. So they basically got a 75% correct, right? And since they see the 12 letters first and then hear the tone, and they're able to say recognize these first 3 letters and not the B perhaps, that suggests that maybe they were able to process, 3/4 or 9 of the 12 letters in this whole display. And the beep allowed them to retrieve only the ones in the top row. However, if the tone was delayed until a full second, performance declined to only 4.5 letters out of the whole 9. In other words, if we have a cue here that comes within 1 second, so either immediately or after 50 milliseconds, 30 milliseconds, or so on, there's a very brief delay, that tone allows us then to sort of direct our attention to a subset of that display that we have in our memories. We have sort of in this, not really a memory, but like a sensory buffer, and report just that information. So this basically led to the discovery of what's called the sensory store, also sometimes known as the sensory register. And it was all the visual information, right, that we experience. Sort of the idea is that there's sort of this little buffer in our nervous system that holds it for a very brief amount of time. When the tone occurs immediately after seeing the letters, the clarity was good enough for recognizing the additional letters in the cued row. With time, the clarity of the sensory image fades, however. So after just 1 second, too much time has passed. Our little sensory store here can't keep it indefinitely, and so their performance drops quite a bit. Their performance was therefore equal to the whole report procedure in which they attended to the entire display, and there was no more advantage to having that tone to help them focus on the top row, middle row, or bottom row.